JavaScript provides a number of features for dealing with arrays. So these are a few functions that we can use with the array. So let's go through them one by one. Let's create first, let's create a student class using functions. So we create a class like this function student, and then we give the parameters which are set in the object, right? And then we have two functions. One is the log function, which basically displays the name of the student, gender of the student, and the age of the student. And then there is a other function. So this should be like this should not be function log, rather this should be this dot log is equal to function, right? So to make it a property of the class or of the object, we make it like this dot log is equal to function. So log would be the function. And then we have an other function, which is make element. What does this function do? This function basically creates a div and stores the name of the student, the gender of the student, and age of the student in that div, right? And then it assigns the name, gender, and age to the elements that we have created using document.create element. And then we append the name, gender, and age to the main element, which is student, so which is basically a div. And then we basically return the student object, which is basically student element, right? So this is the element. Now, just to demonstrate how this object would behave. So the name of the class would be student. So we will create a new student. Let's say let Ali is equal to new student, right? So we are creating an object using this function constructor. We provide the name, the gender, and then the age, right? So in this way, we have created this new student. And just if we want to display the student on console, we have implemented the function this.log. So we'll just call ali.log, and this would basically display the student on console, right? So let's try this thing. So you see that the student object that we have created has been displayed on the log. If we want to make this node appear in the students div, which is a div in our body element. So we just get the students div and append this element into that div. So let's say we get the students div using query selector. So here is the student div. So we get the student div is equal to document.query selector. And then as we have created this object Ali, we can call its make element function. The make element function would return an HTML element, which can be appended as a child to the student div. So we call student div dot append child. And then we call the make element function of this object Ali, right? So what this call would do, this would basically create a div for the student and return it, right? So the div would contain the name in H1, gender and age in paragraphs, and that's it, right? So we add this div to the students div, and it should appear in the students div, which is in the body of the HTML document. So we just save it, and we can see that the student information has appeared in the students div as an individual div. So we can create as many students as we want, right? Now, if we want to, when we are like working with multiple elements in JavaScript and they are of the same type, we often put them in an array and then use array functions provided by JavaScript for our ease. So for example, we create an empty array right? And if you recall, the array has a push function which adds an element uh, to the array. So we create an array, empty array, and then push four students to the array, right? So we just like create new objects and push them to the students array, right? So this is how we add them. Now, if we want to display, uh, let's say we want to display all these students on console, what we can do for let I is equal to 0 to I is less than students array dot length I plus plus, right? That is one way, or we can use for off syntax let s of students array, right? And then for each of the student, we can call the log function, right? So what this would do, this should display all the students on the console, right? So this has displayed all the students on the console. Now, this is like one way of doing this thing using the for statement and passing the students array to the for statement. Another way is to use the students array, right? And then call the for each function. So the student array has multiple functions, for each is one of them. So what does this function do? It basically iterates over all the elements, and the syntax is the for each function basically receives an anonymous function in which the student object is passed as a parameter, right? So if we say that s, if we use arrow notation for the anonymous function, then s is received as a parameter. So in the first iteration, s would contain the first student, that is Ali. Then second iteration, s would contain the second student, which is Busher, and so on. So we receive this as parameter, and then we can do anything on with this, right? So we can have multi-line code, or we can have a single line code. Let's say we just want to log them, so we just like log them as. And you know that if in the arrow function we can, if we have just one parameter, we don't need the parentheses. Parentheses are optional. And this, what this would do, this would do the same thing as we had done earlier using for off statement, right? So we just try it, and you see that it has the same behavior as for off, but it is much more compact, right? And if we want to create an element for each of the students and append it to the student's div, what can we do? We will use multi-line function. In fact, we don't need multi-line, so we can do it in one line. Let's try student's div dot append child, right? So append child takes an HTML element, and that HTML element is returned by make element function. So we just call the make element function, right? So what this would do, this would simply create the append child function with so students dot append child function with each of the students object, right? So S in the first iteration would contain information about Ali, then second iteration Bushra, and so on. So we just save it, and you can see that like this just one line of code has displayed the data which was stored in an array. So we have an array, and we want to find the first find like we want to like search something, and we just want the first result that we get. So for example, in this array, we want to find the first student who is 20 years old, right? So for that thing, JavaScript provides find function. So find function, all these array functions basically take um, anonymous functions as parameters, and the concept is the same. Each function basically receives the parameter, and then we can use that parameter in the iteration. So this thing would be executed for each of the elements. So s is received as a parameter, and as we want to search based on the age, so we just say that s dot age is equal to 20, right? So what this would do, this would basically, this find function would go through the array, starting from the first element, and it would match. So the first element would go into S, and then we match s dot age with 20. So if it's false, it would move on to the second element. If it's false, it will move on to the third element, and so on. So in the third element, this condition would become true, and the find function would basically return this object, right? So we can say that s is equal to students array dot find s dot age 20, and then when we log it, s dot log, so what should be displayed? Daniel, right? So we see that Daniel is returned. We can like use any parameter for the search. So we can search based on gender, based on name, based on any attribute. And let me ask you, like, if we have an array of numbers, right? और इसमें से हम लोग जो है वो वन फाइंड करना चाहते हैं, ठीक है? तो उसके लिए क्या करेंगे यूजिंग द फाइंड फंक्शन?
फाइंड सर।
फाइंड
फाइंड फिर
एन
एन, अगर हम लोग वेरिएबल पहले से ले रहे हैं तो वी कर देते हैं, वी
सर, फिर एरो फंक्शन और उसके बाद वी इक्वल्स
वी
टू
इज इक्वल टू
ट्रिपल इक्वल टू
वन
1.
सो अगर हम लोग वो
वन होगा।
टाइप को भी कंसीडर करना चाहते हैं तो ट्रिपल इक्वल टू यूज कर सकते हैं, अदरवाइज ट्रिपल इक्वल टू, एंड देन इफ वी लाइक console डॉट लॉग एन, so we should get it right. So in this case it has returned 1, right? And if we want to search for example 5, so it returns 5, right? And if we want to find a number which is not present in the array, so let's say we try to find 55, then what happens? We get undefined, right? So if the value is not found, we get undefined. So basically nothing is returned. Okay, so this find function is clear. Now let's move on to the next function, which is like which is basically filter. Filter is the same as the find function, but it returns all the matching objects, right? So for example, if two students are of age 20, s dot the filter function would basically return both of them, right? And if we like just display them, so we get two students, right? And the two students are Daniel and Fatma, both are of age 20, right? So if we want to get all the results, then we use the filter function. And then of course we can do this thing like just for the students, we can use the for each function. So what are we doing? Basically, we are basically filtering all the elements in which age is 20, right? And then what we are doing, we are getting an array, and then for this array, we call the for each function, and we basically append it to the students div, right? So in this case, we only display the students whose age is 20. And of course, we can like do it like this as well. So if we don't want to save the results for like subsequent use, we can just call the filter function, and then the filter function would result some objects, and then for each object we call the for each function, right? So we can use this like in chaining method. Then the next function is map function. If you want to do some processing on all the elements, then we can use the map function instead of the for each function. Let me demonstrate you using an example though. Let's say we have this numbers array, right? And what we want to get is we want to get the square of each of these elements. So of course we can use nums dot for each, right? And we can say that n is received as parameter, and we just say n times n. But where would it go, right? So if we just like store the results in a temporary variable and console.log temp, let's see what happens. So we don't get anything. So this for each function basically does not return anything. Um, we can like console.logit, we can append that to some HTML element, but what if we want to get these results in a variable, right? So when we want to get the results in a variable, we use the map function, right? So what would map do? Map would basically go through each of the elements in the array, right? Do some processing on that element, and then whatever is returned, in this case, like this n times n is returned, it is placed in another array, and that array is returned. So now if we do the same thing using map function, we see that this temporary array basically contains the result returned by the map, right? So it is the same as for each, but the difference is the results are stored in an array. Let's say put the names of the students in list items, right? So we create uh, an object list items, right? Um, and then we use like students array dot map. So we get student as parameter. And then what we want to do, we want to put the name of the student in list item, right? So this is just for demonstration purposes. We know that we don't use in a HTML function, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So what we are doing here, we are basically getting s as parameter, and then we just put the name of the student in list item. So when we say that list items is equal to students array dot map, so list items would basically contain all the student items in form of list items, right? So we see that now we have an array containing list items as elements. We can basically put this thing in an unsorted list, and then we can make it part of the student step. As each of the list element is in a different index, so we have to process them one by one. So we say that, let's say HTML is equal to UL. We start with the UL, and then we say that list items dot for each, right? And then we get these list items one by one, list item, and then we append it to the HTML. So we say that HTML plus is equal to list item, right? So what we are doing, we are basically iterating over the list items and making them, putting them in HTML, right? So we are doing this like one by one, and then we close the list item plus is equal to slash UL, and let's say we log it. So you see that now the list items are placed in a UL, right? And if you want to like display them, this is not the right way of doing it, but as we are like focusing on something else, we can use it just for demonstration. So if we say that dot inner HTML is equal to HTML, then what would happen? These names would be displayed in the students div in form of list item. If we want to, let's say, if we have an array and we want to iterate through all of its elements, but then do some kind of aggregation on it as well. So for example, if we have this numbers array and we want to add its values. So we have this numbers array and we just want to add the values. So if we want to like process all the values one by one and aggregate them, like we want just one value against all the values, all the elements of an array, we can use the reduce function. So for example, if we do not use the reduce function, what we would do something like that: sum is equal to 0 for n of nums. Sum is equal to sum plus n, right? And console.log sum, right? So we can add numbers like this thing, like this approach. So if we do the same thing using the reduce function, we can do it like this. So we have nums dot reduce, right? And then the reduce function basically takes the anonymous function in reduce basically takes two parameters. So all the other functions we have discussed earlier take only one parameter, which is the like current element at the current index, but it takes two variables. So one is the previous and the second one is the current, right? And then what we can do something like, what do we want to do with the previous value and what do we want to do with the current value? So for example, in this case, let's say the previous value is 0, right? And what do we want to do with the previous value? We want to add it to the current value, right? So let's think of it as like sum and n, right? So sum is the previous value. So we get the previous value. If we like expand it like the sum is equal to sum plus n. So what we are doing, we are using the previous value and adding the current value into the previous value. So think of it like this is the previous value and this is the current value. And what we want to do, we want to just add them. So we add the current value with the previous value. And of course, as we initialize the previous value with some um, value, in this case sum is initialized by 0, the second parameter of this reduce function, this whole anonymous function is the first parameter. Then the second parameter is what value do you want to assign to the previous variable. So initially, so what would be the initial value to the previous, in this case previous is sum. So what this call would do, this would basically assign sum equal to 0 for the first for the initialization, and then for each iteration it would add n to sum, and then that result would be used in the next iteration until we reach the end of the array. Now if we just console.log it, we should get the same result, right? So we get 18. Now let's say we want to do this thing, creating the HTML using on this list item, right? So we have this list items जो map से हम लोगों ने जो है वो बेसिकली क्या किया था, नेम्स को सराउंड कर दिया था लिस्ट स्लैश लिस्ट से. देखें इसको हम लोग लाइक स्टेप बाय स्टेप ब्रेकडाउन करने की कोशिश करते हैं. लिस्ट आइटम्स के अंदर हमारे पास क्या पड़ा हुआ है, एल स्लैश एल की फॉर्म में हमारे पास नेम्स पड़े हुए हैं जो हम लोगों ने मैप से किए थे. तो अगर हम लोग इसको console.log पे देखें तो लिस्ट आइटम्स में हमारे पास ये 4 वैल्यूज पड़ी हुई हैं. ये भी एक एरे है और इसके फर्स्ट इंडेक्स पे ये वैल्यू है, सेकंड इंडेक्स पे ये वैल्यू एंड सो ऑन, राइट? अब हम लोग करना ये चाह रहे हैं कि चारों वैल्यू हम लोग पास करें रिड्यूस के फंक्शन को, रिड्यूस इनको कंकैटिनेट करके एक स्ट्रिंग बनाते हैं. वो अब कैसे कर सकते हैं? ठीक है, तो इसको रिड्यूस को पैरामीटर क्या देंगे?
वही एक सम देंगे ना, सम अगर हम एम्प्टी स्ट्रिंग कर लें आगे और सम
जनरली
प्लस
हम लोग ये करते हैं कि प्रीवियस वैल्यू क्या थी और करंट वैल्यू क्या है. ठीक है, तो ये दो पैरामीटर्स आ गए एनोनिमस फंक्शन को, और क्या करेंगे?
प्रीवियस जो है वो नल कर देंगे, मतलब एम्प्टी कर देंगे.
ठीक है,
और
इनिशियलाइज
current
हम लोग
तो
प्रीवियस को, ये इनिशियलाइजेशन
जी.
हमारे पास सेकंड पैरामीटर के तौर पे होगी, वो हम लोगों ने नल से कर दिया. फिर
और वही p प्लस इक्वल्स टू c करंट.
p प्लस c कर देते हैं. तो ये इसके अंदर प्लस जो है वो कंकैटिनेशन कर रहा होगा. ठीक है, एंड ऑफ कोर्स लाइक वी कैन डू अदर थिंग्स एज वेल. सो फॉर एग्जांपल हम लोग अगर इसको वो लाइक स्लैश n भी उसके साथ लगाना चाहते हैं तो हम लोग ये कर सकते हैं, प्रीवियस स्लैश n और फिर करंट. ठीक है, स्लैश n, या अगर हमारे पास पहले से वो प्रीवियस के पहले स्लैश n लगा हुआ है तो वी कैन जस्ट डू दिस थिंग, राइट? सो अब ये क्या करेगा हमारे पास, ये हमारे पास लिस्ट स्लैश लिस्ट के बीच में सारों को कंकैटिनेट कर देगा. ठीक है, अब यहाँ पे हम लोग लाइक वो टेम्पलेट लिटरल जो है वो यूज कर रहे हैं, तो हमारे पास जो है वो प्लस लगाने की जरूरत नहीं है, बट वी नो के पहले वाली जो उसकी वैल्यू थी उसके बाद न्यू वैल्यू जो है वो हमारे पास आ जाएगी. ठीक है, तो लेट्स ट्राई दिस थिंग, और इसको हम लोग HTML को डिस्प्ले करके देखते हैं. ठीक है, तो यू सी के हमारे पास अब वो स्लैश n की वजह से हमारे पास जो है वो हर जो वैल्यू है वो नई लाइन में है, लेकिन यू सी के वी डोंट हैव एन एरे, दिस इज जस्ट लाइक वन स्ट्रिंग. इसके अंदर से अगर स्लैश n को रिमूव कर दें तो जस्ट हम लोग कंकैटिनेशन कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, तो हमारे पास कंकैटिनेट होके वैल्यूज आ गई. तो मुझे ये बताएं कि अगर मैं यहाँ पे यूएल लिख दूं तो क्या होगा?
यूएल के साथ कंकेटिनेट हो जाएगा सर, जो लिस्ट आइटम्स हैं।
जी, हर बेसिकली इटरेशन के अंदर ये होगा या सिर्फ फर्स्ट इटरेशन के लिए ये होगा?
फर्स्ट के लिए होगा
सिर्फ
सर।
फर्स्ट के लिए होगा सर।
एक्सेलेंट एक्सेलेंट। सो फर्स्ट इटरेशन में क्या होगा? पी के अंदर जो है वो यूएल चला जाएगा, सी के अंदर जो है ये फर्स्ट लिस्ट स्लैश लिस्ट जो है वो पड़ा हुआ होगा, ठीक है? तो यूएल और आगे फिर हमारे पास जो है वो लिस्ट आइटम जो है वो आ जाएगा, ठीक है? और आगे हम लोग कंटिन्यू करेंगे और फिर हम लोग ये कर सकते हैं कि HTML के आगे हम लोग अपेंड करते हैं उसके बाद HTML प्लस इज इक्वल टू स्लैश यूएल कर दें। तो अब हमारे पास जो है वो ये वाला इनिशियल जो यूएल है ये हमारे पास आ गया इनिशियल वैल्यू से, ठीक है? और जो प्लस इज इक्वल टू यूएल है ये हमारे पास एंड में हम लोगों ने इसको कंकैटिनेट कर दिया। सो वी गेट द होल कोड फॉर unsorted list. And of course, if we like make it part of inner HTML of if you make it inner HTML of students tab, so this should be displayed here. So let's first sort the nums array. So let's say we have 5, 1, 2, 7, right? So if we call this function sort function, right? We display the original array, then we sort the array, right? And then display the sorted array, and then we want to display the original array. We can see that after calling the sort function, the original array is changed. So that means the sorting is done in place. So it would basically change the original array. So we can just call the sort function, and when we log it, we will see the sorted values. So what if we call the sort function for the students array object? Won't have these values is sorted. Let's say if the original array was like this, and the sort function, can you figure out how is it sorting, right? So it is not doing anything. So in case of objects, we have to tell that how the object should be sorted. A dot name is less than p dot name. We return -1, right? And if a dot name is equal to b dot name, then we return 0, otherwise 1. Now it has sorted based on the name of the students, right? a dot age को हम लोग b dot age से सब्ट्रैक्ट कर देते हैं। बेसिकली अब नेम के ऊपर सॉर्टिंग हो जानी चाहिए, सॉरी एज पे, राइट? सो हमारे पास 20, 20, 21, 22 एज पे सॉर्टिंग होगी।